Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, do not fall. Do not fall. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. My name is Cy Vance. I'm the Manhattan District Attorney, and I'm so pleased to be at John Jay University. Thank you, Carol, for hosting us. And thank you all for making time to come to celebrate with us the results of the hard work of so many in trying to accomplish the elimination of the rape kit backlog in the United States. So thank you for being here. We're going to hear from an array of speakers today, and I'm very grateful to them, as I'll say individually, for their coming to us today and sharing their stories. When I think about today and what we are announcing, I think about a very important day on July 4th in 1876, when Susan B. Anthony, who was, as you all know, a social reformer and women's rights activist, spoke at the Declaration of Rights of the Women of the United States. And what she said on that day was, we are asking for justice, we are asking for equality, and we are asking that all the civil and political rights that belong to the citizens of the United States be guaranteed to us as women and our daughters forever. And the march to ensure that guarantee that Susan was speaking about, to ensure equal justice for women, continues almost 150 years later to this morning. In that time period, women have fought for and obtained enormous progress in that regard, in nearly every facet of our American life. But the pursuit of equal justice for women, and particularly equality within the criminal justice system, remains unfinished. For decades, the national backlog of sexual assault kits, which are known as rape kits, perpetuated what I think is a seismic injustice against sexual assault survivors, and in particular women, denying them the very basic equal civil rights under the law that Susan Anthony spoke about on July 4th so many years ago. That backlog not only undermined justice and the perception and reality of inequality, it also made every woman and every American less safe. In 2014, our office, the Manhattan DA's office, announced what was then an unprecedented 3-year, $38 million national investment to address this intergenerational injustice. Using dollars that we had seized in our prosecutions against major banks, we invested those $38 million in 32 jurisdictions and 20 states, and then we asked Congress to match our investment. Now, at the time, estimates suggested that there were hundreds of thousands of untested rape kits collecting dust in police storage facilities all over across the country. And that represented hundreds of thousands of broken promises to survivors of sexual assault. But Congress, thankfully, acted soon thereafter, enabling the U.S. Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance to pledge an additional $41 million toward ending the backlog. Now, we knew at that time that we began this project, based on our own history in New York City, that eliminating such a backlog, while not easy, first of all, could be done. Between 2000 and 2003, my predecessor, Bob Morgenthau, and a team of pioneering prosecutors, some of whom are in the audience today, spearheaded efforts at that time to eliminate our city's rape kit backlog, which then included more than 17,000 kits. Now, clearing that backlog produced an immediate impact on our public safety and brought long-awaited justice to survivors. It enabled our office to file dozens of indictments based on DNA cold case hits, and it helped us to solve crimes across the country by entering these DNA profiles into the FBI's national data bank. And our office learned things from this progress as well, this work. Our office learned that from this endeavor, that testing all rape kits, regardless of the facts of the rape kit, regardless of a subjective interpretation of anybody's belief about the merits of that case, testing all rape kits could help identify suspects best, could convict perpetrators and prevent future offenses, and, importantly, even exonerate the innocent. Now, a decade later, we incorporated these very lessons that we used in the early 2000s into our investment towards ending the national backlog of rape kits. Not every case was going to be solved, I said at the time that we announced our program, but I promised that every kit would be tested, and every hit from every kit would be investigated. And thus, we felt that we could begin to rectify what had been for far too long a tragic failure of our government and law enforcement at all levels, a decades-long systemic denial of equal rights. So today, by contrast, we are here, I think, to celebrate what we've been able to achieve. We are happy to announce that most of the 3-year investment results toward ending the national rape kit backlog are now in. We tested 55,000 rape kits across 20 states with our investment. And of those kits we tested, more than 18,000 newly developed DNA profiles were extracted from biological evidence and uploaded into the FBI's combined DNA index system, which is called CODA. Now, to date, and there will be more solutions of crimes and there will be more prosecutions, but to date, that investment has already yielded 186 new arrests, 64 convictions, including 47 sexual assault convictions. And as I said, that's only today. As we go forward and continue to investigate the hits that match to an identified individual, those investigations, as they continue across the states, will continue to bring justice case by case, survivor by survivor, across America. And I think, for truly a celebratory moment, our investment has yielded the elimination or near elimination of rape kit backlogs in 7 states. So I'd like to give the states, and I'd like you to join me in applauding Arkansas, Georgia, Kentucky, Michigan, North Dakota, Ohio, and Oregon for the work that they've done. It was not just the money that yielded these results. Instead, it was leadership, it was determination, and courage of many in the room, and many in this room today, and certainly the people behind me. Members of law enforcement, elected lawmakers, tireless advocates, and fearless survivors. They made this day possible, and as I said, they are nowhere near done. Since 2015, the Bureau of Justice Assistance has contributed $154 million toward ending the backlog, and is gearing up to release a new solicitation just this year. BJA Director John Adler and John J. President Carol Mason, who previously headed the Office of Justice Programs, are both here with us today. And I'd like to give them a huge round of applause for ensuring the federal government's continuing investments in this area. So, thank you so much. And very importantly, we could not have this day, this celebration, without acknowledging Mariska Hargitay and her Joyful Heart Foundation. I can't state enough how they awakened the national consciousness on this issue and have worked tirelessly and have provided resources year after year to support survivors while at the same time advocating for changes to the law. And at the state level, Georgia State Representative Scott Holcomb, who is also standing on the stage with me here today, sponsored in his state a paradigm-shifting bill that required every kit to be tested. We're also joined today by Multnomah County DA Rod Underhill, my colleague from the Northwest, also here on stage, who passionately supported comprehensive rape kit reform in Oregon. And thanks to their efforts and others like them, their states are in the vanguard when it comes to testing every kit and standing with survivors. Survivors like Maisha, Justina, Tracy, and Tawana, who are standing behind me and who are some of the strongest people that we'll ever meet. Survivors who rightfully assume that we in law enforcement had forgotten about them. Survivors who for years watched law enforcement forensically test every firearm they recovered, every drug powder they seized, within days of obtaining those items of evidence, but not rape kits. Survivors who are now receiving calls they never thought they would, informing them that their assailant had been identified and that justice, a concept they would be forgiven for disbelieving in, justice can now commence. It's worth reiterating that not every case will be solved or lead to a prosecution, but testing every kit is our best practice and it is our moral imperative, both to ensure survivors receive the support and action they deserve, but also to ensure that these backlogs never happen again. Dedicated funding streams are necessary to end the backlog, but they are not in and of themselves sufficient. States must simultaneously rewrite their laws. So, throughout today's summit, our office will speak about 4 key legislative actions that we are recommending in our Test Every Kit report, which I believe you all should have, and if you don't, we'll get them in your hands. It's a great report outlining the work that's been done. Our states, 1, have to mandate timely testing of all new rape kits with ongoing funding guaranteed by the state. 2, states must require by statute the testing of all backlog rape kits. 3, states must require an annual statewide inventory of untested rape kits and develop systems to track rape kits throughout the testing process. And 4, states, including New York, must eliminate the statute of limitations for felony sexual assault charges. Just as important, we will also discuss today how states and law enforcement agencies can integrate victim-centered and trauma-informed approaches as they engage with survivors who are receiving these calls. So as we gather today, the number of sexual assaults reported to law enforcement in New York City and across the country is rising, and that is due, we believe, in great part to the movement of brave survivors coming forward, who are forcing a long overdue reckoning with decades of power imbalance, intolerable sexual abuse, and being ignored. So now, going forward, today, more than ever, we need to stand vigilantly behind the survivors and do everything in our power to guarantee them what Susan Anthony talked about so many years ago: justice, equality, and all the civil rights that belong to any citizen or resident of the United States. We have to test every kit. So, we are joined, as I said earlier, by 4 incredible women who can speak firsthand to the power of testing every kit. Maisha joins us first from Arizona. Her story exemplifies the failure of law enforcement to take many survivors and their cases seriously. Her attacker, we now know, was a serial predator who faced 9 of his victims when they testified ultimately at his trial. Evidence collected from rape kits years after his attacks, combined with the bravery of survivors and tenacity of newly assigned detectives, brought that man to justice. But now I'll let Maisha tell her story.
Good morning. In July 2012, I was a recently divorced 27-year-old with 2 young children. I was exploring my newly adult single life through the world of online dating websites. I had received a message online from a man who introduced himself as Nathan Beckham. The first impression was that he wasn't my type, but we chatted anyway. A week or so later, he had asked if we could go out. I declined, but he asked again, refusing to take a no. I said I wasn't interested in a relationship with him, but we could go and be friends. He agreed, and we decided on grabbing a drink, dancing, normal stuff. Upon meeting him, Nathan was a little bit more extreme than I had cared for, but friendly nonetheless. He bought 99 banana shooters, and to ease the nice to meet you jitters, we took them, clinked bottles, and moved on to the bar. We ordered some beers and sat down to chat. Before heading to our next destination, I excused myself to the restroom and returned to finish my drink. It was then that when we were walking down the street, my legs felt strange. I rolled my ankle. I tripped, but I didn't fall. I thought nothing more of it. I was starting to feel tired, and the next beer just wasn't helping. I mentioned dancing again in hopes to give me energy. Heading towards the club, I noticed my feet didn't feel like they were feeding the ground anymore, and my legs started to feel like jello. I took a tumble. It was hard. I was bleeding from one of my knees and the top of my hand. Gravel was stuck in my palms from when I tried to catch my fall. This just was not me. I was completely out of sorts. From there, my memory starts to go in and out. I wanted to go home, but I ended up in a cab. It was there that I felt ill. I opened the door and vomited a few times. I passed out. Being disoriented, I woke up in the cab outside a motel. Nathan was asking if I could pay because he didn't have enough money for a room. I thought we were going to my car. I was weak, groggy, and I knew I should rest before even driving anywhere. So I paid. I don't remember how, but I got upstairs. There was trouble with the room key, and he left me slumped on the floor outside the room to go get another. I pulled my phone out to try calling someone to come and get me, but I was really unsuccessful. After getting the room, I fell asleep on one of the beds. I was woken up to chatter from two unknown women, and I could tell Nathan was flirting with them. I wrote it off. We were new friends, and honestly, I was still too drowsy to care. The next time I was woken up was to a hand on my inner thigh. We were now alone. I was a bit shocked, so I rolled over to show I was sleeping and grumbled a nuh-uh. It didn't matter. He hiked up my skirt to my waist, and my underwear came down. I tried to pull my skirt back down, but he grabbed my hands to hold them above my head and tightened his grip. Nathan then proceeded to undo his pants. I was afraid, so I froze. I couldn't believe this was happening. The friendliness was gone, and the danger I didn't see was now there. I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to just see my children. I thought, just hurry up and please be done. After he fell asleep, I quickly gathered my things and I ran out the door and down the stairs. My plan was to walk to my car and just go home. But realizing my location, I knew walking to my car was no longer an option. So I called my mother, and in the desolate parking lot, I waited in fear. My ex-husband was sent to pick me up, and he insisted we call the police. I just wanted to leave. The officers show up, and I gave them the info that they asked for, and they go and question Nathan. They come back stating, he says it wasn't rape, it was consensual, and you paid for the room. So I was shocked, hysterical, and ashamed, all while waiting out in the parking lot. All I could muster as a response was, I just want to go home, just let me go home. So the officer gave me his card with the case number and sent me on my way. It was later that I decided on my own to obtain a rape kit. I was never offered at the scene to get a rape kit by the responding officers, nor was I even contacted by a detective after. Years passed, life moved on, and I mourned losing the carefree, almost naive part of me. I recognized the rape as a part of my story, and I closed the chapter. I forced myself back out to the dating scene, and I met my current wonderful husband. It wasn't until February 2017 that I got a knock on my door from Detective Dallas Wilson and a victim's advocate, Colleen Phelan. And my chapter was reopened. They told me about the recent grant funds Pima County had received and that my kit had been tested and DNA was identified. They asked if I'd be willing to prosecute. Yes, I was no longer going to be silent. Long story short, myself and 8 other brave women pulled together and we brought Nathan Lobe to trial to seek justice. We rode the roller coaster of emotions that is a trial. The jury got to hear our stories. They saw his behavior and the patterns. And in the end, he was found guilty on all 21 counts. We now await sentencing, and we are so happy that we got the justice we sought. It was long awaited. The team that we had was just great. I know there are many others out there that never received that reward. Having my kit finally tested was a catalyst for hope and change, not only for myself, but for my fellow survivors and for all those who are impacted by sexual assault. Thank you.
Maisha, law enforcement clearly failed you as a survivor, and I think all of us are truly sorry for that failure and are so grateful for your bravery in helping to turn that narrative around and to be here today with us. Next, it's truly my pleasure to introduce John Adler, who is the Director of the Bureau of Justice Assistance at the Department of Justice. Now, BJA has been a fantastic partner to my office throughout the life of this Rape Kit initiative. And I just got to tell you how grateful I am to John and to BJA for their partnership and deep commitment to bringing justice to survivors. Since 2015, BJA has committed $154 million and growing under John's leadership to 54 jurisdictions in 35 states to end the national rape kit backlog. John had previously an esteemed career in law enforcement, which he continues in his current job today. He is a lifelong New Yorker, and it's truly my pleasure to welcome John to the podium.
Well, thank you to the Manhattan DA for leading this powerful event. Thank you, sir. And to John Jay's great president, Carol Mason, thank you for hosting this event. This is extremely important. But my heart thanks go to the 4 very brave survivors standing behind me for having the courage to stand here before all of us today and share their heartfelt experiences and have the honor and courage to do that. Thank you. You honor us all with your presence. So for over 4.5 decades, convicted serial rapist killer Samuel Little wreaked havoc across our country, destroying lives in his wake. In the past year, Little confessed to 93 rape homicides. 93. Thanks to the innovative work of BJA, and as the DA alluded to, started under Carol's leadership prior to my coming on, and with Dr. Williamson here today, one of the leaders on the team, working with the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program and the Texas Rangers, and coordinating with DAs and investigators across the country, they incredibly corroborated 49 of those confessions. And the remarkable thing about this, well, we obviously wish it never happened. We wish that Little was never put onto our sacred earth. But there isn't anything we can do about that now. But what we can do, and what the district attorney hit on, is proactively apply the innovation to get these kits processed. And that's what our teams have been doing across the country. And I fully expect they will continue to corroborate the additional confessions by Little. And for those who may be wondering why is this important, what he had done over 4.5 decades, the 4 brave heroes standing behind me evidence why this is important. The case may be cold, but the pain isn't. The pain is real. The pain is present. It doesn't go away. And that's why we are all collectively committed to pursuing, capturing, prosecuting those responsible for these heinous crimes. Now, I mentioned Dr. Angela Williamson, who's here today, one of the leaders on my team. She is the Senior Forensic Policy Advisor. What does that mean? It means she does all the work. And she has been our leader, building these multidisciplinary teams comprised of district attorney offices. The Portland DA is here today as well, another example. Law enforcement, victim advocate groups, and crime labs. Getting all the relevant teams or players together to build capacity to get these kits processed, but not only get them processed, but to extract value from the DNA that ultimately may get uploaded into the combined DNA index system. In and of itself, DNA is just part of who we are. That alone doesn't solve crimes. So it's bringing these important individuals together, and that's what Dr. Williamson continues to do on behalf of BJA. As the DA mentioned, since 2015, a lot of great work has been done. So in my position, I simply oversee the department that funds the great work that the victim advocate groups do, the prosecutors do, law enforcement, the crime labs. And it's an honor to be in that position to observe and support that great work, to support our victims, to support their families, to make sure justice is delivered. Now, We also emphasize the need that, as we said and as the DA alluded to, the DNA in and of itself has to get uploaded into this system. We have to process these kits. We can't leave them. We can't abandon them because they represent humans who may have been subject to heinous crimes. This isn't something that should collect dust. This is something we embrace and we pursue with honor. Now, the add-on piece to this is that the DNA kits, the sexual assault kits don't necessarily provide an immediate answer. They don't necessarily provide an immediate portrait of our perpetrator. So it's important, and one of the programs overseen by the FBI, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, otherwise known as VICAP, because we have to have acronyms in the federal government, is a critically important program. What it does is it combines the DNA, the hits from CODIS, with other investigative evidence, maybe access to witnesses, access to victims possibly, other forensic evidence that may help investigators, detectives across the country connect these critical DNA dots to identify and catch these perpetrators. Now, BJA, Dr. Williamson, her team, we are committed. As long as Congress provides us with the funding, with honor, we will lead this program. And our collective goal is, let's get these kits processed, let's get them tested, let's build the best practices to get value out of this. Let's make the world cell block small for these serial killers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John, and thank you for your leadership and for your partnership. Justina is our next survivor here, and she's a new mother, a 3.5-month-old baby, which she's brought to New York with her. Justina, we all want to congratulate you on the birth of Anaya and for making the effort to come here from Michigan. We hope Anaya likes the Big Apple and that you have a really good time while you're here. Now, Justina was only 14 years old when she was sexually assaulted by a family friend. Despite being able to identify her attacker, Justina's case was not pursued. And her kit, like so many other stories, sat on a shelf untested until 2016. And the evidence from that kit, coupled with Justina's testimony, brought a repeat offender to justice. Justina.
Okay, well, good morning. My name is Justina. When I was 14, a close family came and stayed with me and ended up sexually molesting me. I told my mother, who called the police. When they arrived, they collected evidence and sent for my rape kit. I have never heard from them again. 2 years ago, I was at work, and my brother ended up calling me and told me where we're at my house. They needed to speak with me. He told me that they were prosecutors. That freaked me out. When I got home, they were still there and started asking about my attack. I was angry. It had been 3 years. Why hadn't they talked to me back then? I had been in counseling. I had moved on with my life. When my nephew, Caleb, he was just born, my mom said, what if this would happen to him? That's why I cooperate. People like my attacker should not be committed a crime after crime. I testified against him, and he was convinced. I learned that there were several other young women like me who had been attacked by him. Because I was the first to come forward, the other women did not need to testify. He was convinced and sent to prison until 2037. My message to the other women is that it's okay to come forward. Don't be scared. You will get through this, and your voice is your power. I feel proud of myself. Since this has happened, I have accomplished so much. I have graduated high school, I've had my daughter, and I'm starting college soon, and I have a job that I love. I hope if my daughter reads this about this one day, she's inspired by her mother and knows not to be afraid of anything.
Thank you, Justina. And I think one thing that Justina's story tells us is how important testing kits is to preventing sexual assault. That not until that information is extracted and can be uploaded are we capable, if that person commits a crime in the future, to identify that person. So, Justina, thank you very much. You were great and powerful. Our next speaker is Ilsa Knecht, the Director of Policy and Advocacy of the Joyful Heart Foundation. I can't speak strongly enough about the phenomenally powerful work of the Joyful Heart Foundation in this space. Years ago, when we started this effort, Karen Friedman and my chief assistant came to me and said, "Cy, we need to take on the national rape kit backlog." And so I said, of course, because Karen asked me. But I didn't know, frankly, the scope of the problem. I was ignorant of the scope of the problem. But once I was educated, I understood the importance of the task we were taking on. But we could not have had a better partner than the Joyful Heart Foundation. And so I am grateful to Ilsa, the foundation, and Mariska for their leadership and helping to show us the way forward. Ilsa has single-handedly spearheaded Joyful Heart's national advocacy efforts, working tirelessly to enact legislative changes in states from Georgia to California and in New York. Ilsa has been an invaluable partner, as I said, to our office throughout this program. She's been a patient, calm expert, guiding us through the many difficult steps of orchestrating and organizing a national program to identify rape kits and to have them tested. So it's with really great affection and thanks that I invite Ilsa to come up and speak to us.
Wow, thank you for that. It's an amazing introduction. I am Ilsa Knecht. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Joyful Heart Foundation, founded by Law and Order SVU actress, advocate, director, Mariska Hargitay. I'm so thankful to be here today for this announcement, and I want to give my heartfelt thanks to all of the survivors who are here and telling us your truth. And I want to say that what happened to you matters, and it matters very much to all of us. Mariska is so sorry that she could not be here today due to her filming schedule, so you got me. But she wanted us to express her gratitude for the monumental accomplishments being announced here today. Since 2010, Joyful Heart has made elimination of the rape kit backlog our top priority. In 2014, we were given the opportunity to work with the District Attorney's Office to think through what a meaningful, impactful investment in rape kit reform would look like. And we were so glad to partner with a team with so much commitment to obtaining justice for survivors. So the district attorney's unique investment motivated the federal government, as you heard here, to fund the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative grant program, which provides funding to state and local entities to take their untested rape kits off the shelf, to test them, to investigate the cases that come out of testing, to prosecute offenders, and to re-engage survivors in the criminal justice system that had failed them so much. The value of testing rape kits is undeniable. It's undeniable now. And when we started this work, there was still a lot of work to do to prove that. In Detroit, where they tested more than 10,000 rape kits, they have found and identified through DNA testing more than 800 serial rapists who have committed crimes in 40 states and the District of Columbia. So what we learned from that is what many of us in the field already knew, which is that rapists often are serial rapists. They commit all kinds of crimes and they travel. And Cleveland has also identified more than 800 serial offenders. So what's incredible, really unfathomable, is that there are still people in power who do not understand the value of testing every rape kit. They fail to see sexual violence as the violent crime that it is. But those of us here today in this room know better. We know the value of testing every single rape kit. We know that it's the right thing to do. And we know the power of DNA and DNA databases to solve and prevent crime. We know that many rapists are serial offenders and they don't stop until they are stopped. That's why Joyful Heart is committed to passing legislation in all 50 states to reform rape kit handling, to make sure that rape kits are counted, to make sure they're tracked, to make sure they're tested in a timely manner, and to make sure that survivors are given the right to know the status of their rape kit. Because many of them leave the hospital and they never hear again, as you've heard from these stories, about their rape kit or a single thing about their case. In the last 2 years, we have been involved in the passage of 50 laws in 32 states, affecting nearly 126,000 survivors. And I didn't do this by myself. It's not single-handed. My staff is here. We have an amazing staff working on this as well. And we are not going to stop until we know that no matter a survivor's zip code, that they know that their rape kit will be tested in a timely manner. So our heartfelt thanks to all of you who are working to bring a path to healing and justice to survivors whose cases have languished for years and many for decades. And Danny and Saki grantees are leading the way on reform across this country. So on behalf of Joyful Heart and the survivors whose voices we carry with us, we want to thank the Manhattan DA's office for igniting change across the country and for helping us to send that powerful message to survivors that what happened to you matters, and we will do everything in our power to help you heal and find a path to justice. Thank you very much.
I remember Mariska early on saying something just like Ilsa said that really was meaningful to me. By not testing these rape kits, as Ilsa said, half of it, what you are saying to the victims is what happened to you doesn't matter. And you're also saying to the perpetrator, what you did, we don't care about. So it's a very powerful message negative message that we're correcting by the work that's been done today and by the bravery of the survivors coming and telling us about what happened to them and how the backlog rape kit tragedy affected their lives. And so I'd like to ask up our third survivor, Tracy, who, like many of the survivors, we met through the implementation of the Testing Backlog Kits program. Now, Tracy waited an unconscionable amount of time for her case to even be investigated or prosecuted. She reported her attack to the police, as you'll hear, but her kit sat untested for 15 years. 15 years. How is that possible with a crime like rape? Now married and living in a new town, one day she answered a knock at her door and heard words that have shocked survivors all over the country, even decades after their attack. We reopened your case, we tested your kit, we know who raped you, and we can prosecute. Tracy.
Hello, my name is Tracy. I am a victim of a sexual assault that took place on June 14, 2002. My night started with myself and someone who I thought was a friend. He picked me up so we could go out to our friend's house for her 21st birthday. We all hung out and played darts. Around 2:30 a.m., I asked Mo to take me home because I was getting tired. So we left. Mo asked me if we could run over to an apartment really quick since we were already there, and I went with him. I assumed the apartment belonged to him or belonged to a friend of his. We went to the apartment, but I found it odd when he pulled out a key. When we walked in there was a long hallway. As soon as we proceeded to walk forward around the corner into the living room, I realized the apartment was vacant. I immediately became uneasy and scared. At that moment, Mo came up behind me and started kissing me. I started to tell him no. As I was moving away from him, he forcibly moved me to the ground. I was in shock and froze in fear as he proceeded to pull my pants down and sexually assault me by putting his face between my legs and biting me. I was trying to push his head away, but every time I tried, he'd bite harder. He finally let go and still had me pinned on the ground. He then tried to rape me, and I squeezed my legs as hard as I could together. And I prayed. I just prayed that he would stop. After what felt like an eternity, he finally stopped. I'm not sure what made him finally stop, but I was happy he did. As he was taking me home, he asked me, "Can we still be friends?" I lied and said sure, knowing there was no way I would ever be friends again. I just wanted to get away from him. When we got to my apartment complex, I quickly got out of the car and I walked very fast to my apartment. My neighbor heard me come home and tried to talk to me, but I wasn't wanting to talk. So I walked away and I went in my apartment. I cried and thought to myself, why did this happen? What could have I done differently? I decided not to shower as to not to wash away any evidence that police might need. I sat on my couch and fell asleep. Later on that day, my husband, who I was separated with at the time, brought the kids home to me. I told him what had happened, and as I was telling him, Mo showed up at my apartment. And my ex told him he needed to leave. Mo left just to return 20 minutes later and knocked on the door again. At that time, I was already on the phone with the police. The police came and arrested him for a 6-inch knife concealed. The police said they couldn't arrest him at that time because it was my word against his word. The police asked me to get the rape kit done, so my mom took me right away. The police contacted me and told me that I would have to come to a conference call to Mo's phone to see if I can get him to say anything about that night. Unfortunately, Mo had disconnected his phone, and so that's as far as the case went for 15 years. 15 years later, a Tempe, Arizona cold case detective came to my apartment and told me they were reopening my case. They were able to run my rape kit, and they were able to go forward with prosecuting Mo in my case. I was in total shock. I had lost all hope in ever getting justice. I was overwhelmed with relief to hear this news after 16 years. I will finally get justice and closure. Mo was found guilty and sentenced to 7 years for sexually assault and attempted to commit sexual assault.
Tracy, thank you. As many of you know, the real movement in legislation that impacts people's lives is happening now at the state level. And we have to look to our state elected officials often for help in addressing some of our country's most serious problems. Our next speaker is just such a person who's been a tireless advocate and champion for legislative changes in his home jurisdiction in Georgia. Representative Scott Holcomb is with us today and represents one of the 6 states that I mentioned who had cleared their backlogs as a result of these investments by our office in the federal government. Now, it's not to say this was easy for Scott because he had unfathomable adversity in getting the legislation passed. But he was the driving force behind Senate Bill 304, which requires that law enforcement turn over stored kits to local labs for testing, and ultimately prevailed in getting this critical piece of legislation passed. I want to thank Scott for all he has done to support survivors and support law enforcement in addressing the rape kit backlog, and welcome him here to New York and invite him up to say a few words.
Thank you very much. It's not every day that a program or a grant leads to a national movement of change, but that's exactly what has happened because of the grants provided by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. These grants have been the catalyst for change across the country and in my home state of Georgia, and I am extremely grateful to District Attorney Vance and your team for the leadership that you have shown on this issue to address the national backlog of untested sexual assault kits. This work has led to lasting change. It has led to the implementation of new policies across the country. It has resulted in the testing of thousands of kits. It has identified serial rapists, and it has provided law enforcement with leads to help solve cold cases. In my state of Georgia, I've benefited from collaborating with and learning from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I've also benefited from collaborating and working with the Joyful Heart Foundation, and our own Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, which is here today, has done incredible work making sure that Georgia leads on this issue. And I'm also grateful to all the advocates who have taught me so much about this issue. Part of my passion comes from being a former prosecutor. And I saw firsthand the devastation that these crimes inflict on the survivors and those that they love. So what we have done in Georgia is we have worked very hard. We now have policies that address the backlog. We did a statewide audit, and we found thousands of kits that were sitting on shelves in hospitals and in law enforcement agencies. We moved all of them to our Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and we tested every single one, and the last one was tested in November of 2018. Because of that, we've identified serial rapists. We have hundreds of CODIS hits that are now leading to new cases, and it is work that is really making a difference for survivors, and I couldn't be prouder to be a part of it. But we're not finished. Just last week, I've sponsored legislation to make sure that now that we have done the testing, we preserve it. And so the Georgia House of Representatives passed a bill that states that we will hold our evidence for the period that the crime remains unsolved or until the sentence is completed. That's something that has to happen across the country. So as I close, I want to say that throughout all my work on this, what has remained top of mind has been that each kit represents a person, and that person is someone who survived a horrible crime. And it is the duty of all of us to pursue justice for them. And I could not be more honored and humbled to be here today to support survivors. Thank you.
Scott, thank you very much. Taiwan's attack in Michigan, our next speaker, left her both mentally and physically scarred. But I think those are the battle scars of a warrior who protected the safety of her 6 children who were at home during her hours-long attack. After the police refused to prosecute her attacker for rape, she left her state and moved to New York. And now she'll tell her story.
Thanks for having me. Well, it was 1996, October the 24th/25th. I was 4 days into a program called Work First for welfare recipients. I was excited because on that Thursday, I was invited to come back at 7 o'clock in the morning to fill out for a job interview. Out of 31 people in our class, 6 of us was invited to come back. So in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm not used to getting up. I'm not used to getting up and doing anything on time. Let me go home, get my family together early so I can be there at 7. Sometime before night, my doorbell rang, which was strange. I went to the door. My children was running behind me. I made them back up. It was a guy. He asked for a Derrick Jackson. In my mind, I know a Derrick Jackson. I grew up with my mother's siblings, so I knew a Derrick Jackson. But I told him he had the wrong house. He stepped back and looked at the address, and he told me, I remember Dwayne and Yolanda James used to live here, and they could sing. I repeated, you're at the wrong house. Later on that night, after putting everybody to bed, I laid down excited. So let me go to sleep. I fall off to sleep. Felt like I was in a deep sleep. But then all of a sudden I felt like I was wide awake. So, okay, let's go get some water. So I walk out my room, I go down the long hallway that leads to a living room that will lead to the kitchen. I get to the kitchen. No, take that back. I get to the living room. I never made it to the kitchen. And the guy that was at my door earlier is in my living room, looking out the window as though he's waiting on a ride. I focused in on him. He turned around, he saw me. He charged at me. I didn't see a weapon, but his body said he was going to stab me in my stomach. By the time he made it to me, I lost a few seconds. When I looked back up, I was behind him, leaning over a couch that wasn't up against the wall, and me and him both was in an X form. And in that X form, I'm holding his wrists, the left one and the right one, with all my might. My right hand is my weakest. My left hand is my strongest. He overpowered me with my right hand. He snatched out his hand out of my hand. He snatched his left hand out of my left hand, and that left my left hand in the air. And every finger on my left hand was cut. The middle finger was severed to the tendon. So now I'm wounded. I'm being raped. And I'm being held hostage in the house with 6 of my 7 babies. Okay, so moving right along, 1997. After doing a bunch of calling, I physically go to the police department. I'm in the detective's office. I'm inquiring about my case. She says, "Oh, got a 30-day hold on him." She calls the jailhouse. "Oh, he shipped off." My hands go in the air and I say, "How? I haven't been to court." She said, "Oh, we got your number right. Don't worry about it. He did 25. He's doing 25 for being habitual and 15 for home invasion." Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't finish school. I was in special ed. All I've ever had was my wits. Something told me that was not right. But out of respect for her, I walked out of there. 2004, I get a call from my uncle who saw the guy. He told me to call and find out what was going on. I called, gave him this story. They left me on hold. They came back, and he told me, yes, he was out, and that was all the information they can give me. Okay. I packed up my family, put them in a safe place, and was trying to figure out where I was going to go. I wanted to leave Michigan. Out of nowhere, I ended up taking a ride with some childhood friends who I adopted as family. They wanted me to ride while one was moving to New York State. I didn't even want to come. We got here on a Friday. I cried in the back seat. I felt some type of magic. I didn't want to leave. So I told one of them, I don't want to go back to Flint. Mind you, I have all my kids in Flint. October the 4th, I became a resident of New York State. October the 14th, my children arrived. Okay, so let's speed it up. February of 2018, a cousin had just lost his grandfather, and he wanted me to come home to comfort him and bring some type of light. I didn't want to come. I was exhausted. I told him spring break. He insisted. So he got me a ticket, a bus ticket from Syracuse, New York to Ohio, which was weird. Why am I getting off in Ohio? He wanted to pick me up there, and he just wanted to ride home. February the 2nd, 3rd, now we're on Super Bowl Sunday the 4th. We're watching Netflix. That morning, we're talking, sharing stories. The doorbell rings. I go to get the door because I'm thinking it's my nephew coming to see me. I'm in town. I get to the door, and it's the guy who tried to kill me and my family, wanting to shovel snow. First mind absolutely knew it was him. Second mind overpowered it and said, no, it's the brother. Because I did my research over the years, come to find out this guy grew up with my family. So I calmed down, and we negotiated him shoveling snow through the Army Guard. So I asked my cousin, did you want your snow shoveled? He said, yes. How much? The guy said 20. My cousin said no. The guy said, okay, give me what you got. They did business. But I'm puzzled. I'm in the house puzzled. So we're going to speed it up past that. A few days later, I go to the Flint Police Department because after questioning him that day, he told me to run his name. He never did time for that. Yeah, we questioned him that day. He shoveled the snow, he got questioned, and I ended up at the Flint Police Department. And after telling my story, the only thing I was told after that, oh, sounds like a cold case. Oh, really? Well, it was closed in '97, right? That's what she said. Well, right now, currently, I'm awaiting trial. I'm hurt. I'm disgusted. All these intelligent people made it to such great positions. The woman who lied to me ended up retiring and becoming president of a council. I think the problem is we have professional people with these positions, and they're able to do whatever they want with those positions. We, the victim, survivor, we don't know the law. We have our own set. And now this is confirmation that my law matters to me more than the system's law. Because if you do not even follow what you have set in stone, how can I? How can I? And no disrespect to no one in here, but I'm not a survivor. I'm a hero. I caught him. I caught him. He was picked up June the 28th because of me. I pursued that. And it's bizarre. It's no way I should have heard that from him. And I'll be quite frank, I wanted him to die on Super Bowl Sunday 2018. And I had to think about all the great things that I have accomplished since that happened to me, and all the great things that my children have accomplished. They say, oh, it happened a long time ago. 1996, 20-something years ago. My finger hurts every day. I have a wire in my finger. I'm still petrified. I'm wondering when I'm gonna get told that I need to get it amputated. So, I don't know what you guys are gonna do with all this information that you took from us survivors. I don't know. What do we really get but exploited? What do we get? How many more times do I gotta do it y'all way? I don't wanna do it y'all way no more. Y'all human beings and y'all wrote this stuff up and you don't even follow it. So how can I? I'm a community activist in Syracuse, New York. How do I convince my community to be mindful of law? Law enforcement. How do I do that? There's a lot of unfairness going on in you guys' organization, whatever you want to call it, system. I don't want to hear, oh, the system. It's just, no, it's people. Sirs and ma'ams, we created these words on these flyers. So it was a human who put that in stone. Now you have to abide by it or not. I'm a practical person. So I don't know where we go from here. But hopefully, this will never happen again. Hopefully, we will not have to have a meeting like this again. Thank you.
Thank you, Tawana. And I would just say that you are speaking here today and being honest to all of us who are in law enforcement about what you feel and what's happened to you is probably the most powerful thing you could do to make sure that we and others who hold positions, who are supposed to lead in the public safety efforts, do our job. But thank you for being here. Last, but certainly not least, let me introduce the president of John Jay College and my good friend Carol Mason. Carol has a long history as a lawyer in private practice, ran the Bureau of Justice Administration, Department of Justice, under the Obama administration. And Carol, in everything that she has done and touched, has been a leader improving the criminal justice system throughout an incredible career. We're grateful to have you here today, Carol, and please come on up.
Good morning, and I want to say first thank you to District Attorney Cy Vance, because it was his vision, his investment that has gotten us where we are today. I still remember when early on in my term at the Department of Justice, when we found out about the number of untested rape kits in Detroit, and the National Institute of Justice sought to try to figure out a system to try to figure out how to prevent this from happening going forward. And I still remember when District Attorney Vance made his big announcement that he was going to use his asset forfeiture funds to support eliminating sexual assault backlog across the country, not just in New York City. He understood and recognized that this was a national problem and made an investment for all of us to inspire all of us. And so I am grateful for his investment. And it is not often that you get to see something at its creation and to see that what you thought would happen is more than validated 3 years later. So I am grateful for the opportunity to be here at John Jay and to host this wonderful report, which is just the beginning of the work that we all have to do. You've heard from all of us up here, the survivors, and as one of our, she just left, they're not just survivors, they're warriors, they're advocates, and they are compelling us to make sure that we bring justice for them. And so I say this is just the beginning, because now we have a process for understanding why it's so important to test all rape kits. We have laws being enacted across the country to make it mandatory to test all rape kits. District Attorney Vance in this report has laid out the other legislative actions that must happen. But what really must happen is that we've all got to own this work. We all have to understand our role in making sure that every victim of sexual assault is heard and has an opportunity to get justice. Here at John Jay, we talk about that we are educating fierce advocates for justice. And what I want everyone to understand is every single individual in this room is a fierce advocate for justice. Whether you are expecting accountability from your elected officials, from your law enforcement officials, from your prosecutors, whether you're victim advocates, it's in supporting the work that has to get done. This is something that we all own, and I look forward to the work that we're going to do the rest of today in learning how do we learn from this report. Again, it's a beginning. It's not the end. And while I said it's wonderful to be at the evolution of something and to see its work validated, it's not done. And so I hope that every single one of you in this room shares the commitment of the district attorney and all of the folks standing here. And I will also need to recognize the Joyful Heart Foundation, who've been wonderful partners with the Department of Justice and others from the beginning of this work and raising the profile and the importance of this work. But you all are all part of the solution. And I want to say thank you for showing up today. Thank you. I am understanding that you all are committed to joining us in this work. Is that correct? I can't hear you. Yeah. So we're going to make a difference with this work, and I hope that many of you all are staying for the rest of the work that has to be done today. This is a press conference to elevate what's happened, but also it's a charge to all of us to make sure that, as these brave women have told us today, that these stories are never told like this again. We want the stories to be that when they have been victims, that law enforcement heard them. Law enforcement understood and respected what's happened to them and was committed to making sure that we find justice for each and every one of them. So thank you again, District Attorney Vance, for your commitment, inspiring all of us to do this great work.
So we'd like to open it up in just a moment to on-topic questions, but I wanted just to take this opportunity to say thank you. As Carol said and as others have said, this isn't the end. This is a point along a continuum. And we have moved the ball forward from where we got it. But as we are saying thanks at this continuum, I want to thank those folks in my office who have been working on this issue since the early 2000s, Melissa Morgis and Martha Bashford, Audrey Moore, they were that group who put on their blue jeans, put on a T-shirt, went to the warehouse, rolled up their sleeves, and found the rape kits that hadn't been tested. That's how it all started in New York, just simple commitment and hard work. But today, as I said, I've been privileged to be educated and guided by others in my office to commit ourselves to this great work. Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, I've introduced as the principal advocate within our office for me to commence this, but then it's been handed out so beautifully, done so beautifully by Daniel Mindes, Maggie Walk, Karen Sheehan, who's not with me, always Chauncey Parker, and if I've missed someone, I apologize. But I'm grateful to my office for helping us enter this really difficult work in a meaningful way and to help bring us forward. But to all of you in the audience, there are many advocates, there are survivors, probably policy folks. Your commitment to all that you have done, I can tell you, is important. Your courage helps our lawyers have fortitude and have courage. The survivors and heroes that spoke today give us strength to see this through. And so I come today at this interim point really profoundly to say thank you. We would not be here today if not for all of you. And now we'd be happy to take some on-topic questions if there are any. Yes?
Two questions. Why did you decide to spend city money outside the city? And do you have any idea how many kids are out there that are still untested?
I will, for the second part, I will get an answer from those who probably know how many kits are untested. Oh, Ilsa will talk about that. But let me, the dollars that were used is not actually city money. It is state asset or federal asset forfeiture. And it comes to our office because of our work prosecuting foreign banks who illegally moved money associated with rogue regimes like Libya, Sudan, Iraq through our banking system. And by prosecution of those cases and investigation, the statutes gave us a certain portion of monies which we have to decide what we're going to invest it in. These are funds we are privileged to steward, but unlike a foundation, we needed to invest the monies quickly into important criminal justice projects that were more than necessarily filling potholes, that were really making a difference. The answer to your question is, why did we support a nationwide investment in testing rape kits? Is because as a result of this nationwide testing of rape kits, we have solved New York cases with kits tested from Florida, Michigan, North Carolina, Texas, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. Because rapists are often serial rapists. They travel from city to city, state to state. So rapists and sexual assault predators travel through many states. And I was convinced that investing this on a national basis would, in fact, end up solving New York cases. In fact, there's a case involving Joseph Giradella. He was charged with a kit was tested actually from a unknown DNA profile was lifted from a sexual assault in 2000 in New York. And it remained unsolved until 2015 when he was arrested in Florida. His DNA was taken as a result of that conviction and ultimately matched up to a serious sexual assault in New York. And I believe Melissa Morgis, who's in the audience, prosecuted that case. So One answer is because there are New York victims that matter, and we are going to solve those cases that relate to those victims and survivors. And the second answer to your question is, what happened with the failure to test backlog rape kits around the country was an absolute travesty of justice. It was a travesty of justice that was focused principally on women survivors as the victims of two offenses. One, the sexual assault, and then second, to have their case ignored by the very people who they turned to help find the attacker. And so this was a national problem, a national issue, beyond just being a local issue that would have national links. And so looking backward, I think that when we are asked to steward monies that we get from federal forfeiture cases, I cannot think of a better investment. I cannot think of an investment that has helped us move forward in the area of being more proactive, being smarter, bringing justice to survivors of sexual assault. I can't imagine a better investment than the one that we made, not just for New York, but for all the states, because ultimately all the states are connected and we have one justice system and we should be treating all survivors across the country equally.
Another funding question. You did say that the New York money was matched by federal money, or more than that.
More than it was. We started hoping that the federal government would then, us starting, wouldn't let New York just go out there by themselves, and we were right.
So how important is that matching money, and then can you talk about the prospect of that funding continuing going forward?
Let me answer the second question first, and then I'll turn it over to John. As I said, these are a discrete amount of funds that we receive through federal and state equitable asset forfeiture. These are not reoccurring dollars. The dollars we receive, we have to invest, and we have to invest them quickly because we can't put these into the stock market like a foundation would and try to build up capital through building up interest. We actually have to invest the dollars. So the $38 million, I will never say no, but it is unlikely that we'll be able to supplement our investment to identify more rape kits around the country. Now, let's talk about the federal government. When the federal government came in with its $41 million investment, which John will describe, and then years succeeding, more and more dollars, what they've done is simply amazing. And so I'd like to turn it over to John to answer the rest of your question.
So we put out competitive grants based on the monies that are appropriated by Congress. And these grants run in a 3-year period or program cycle. Now, New York City is one of our, and I'll use another acronym for SAKI, Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, again, led by Dr. Williamson. So New York City is one of our SAKI sites. So what that means is we provide funding to bring the training and technical assistance to the city to carry out the mission for what DA Vance has described in very good detail. We have yet again been funded, thankfully, by Congress to continue the program. So what that means is we will post a national solicitation for, I think it's approximately $48 million for fiscal year 19 to not only sustain existing SAKI sites, but hopefully stand up new ones. You know, we currently have SAKI sites in 35 states. We would like to cover the country. So we are optimistic that by the great work being done here and in other districts, the word will spread. The passion of our heroes will spread and resonate, and through your news media coverage, help elevate our voice so we get the applications, so we can apply the funding and stand up more sites, as well as sustain the great work that's been done here in New York City.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. There was another hand. Yeah. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. I was noticing that I think there is a number about untested hits that remain. I think it's estimated in you guys' report to 155,000. I think there are some other estimates.
We have an estimate.
But given the size of the investment already made the amount that seems to still be out there, new ones being discovered pretty continuously. How hopeful are you about ever getting to the end of this problem?
Go ahead.
Sure. Okay. So Joyful Heart has been working to get an accurate count of the number of untested rape kits across the country. It's very difficult because most states, most local communities do not track or count their kits. So there's been an audit or an inventory in about half the states, and so we have about half the states, so we don't know how many kits are there. Wyoming just passed legislation to inventory their untested kits, but there are still a number of states who, which have not even addressed it. So we have a number right now, 250,000 untested kits, which we've sort of cobbled together from a variety of sources. And those involve Freedom of Information Act requests that we have issued to law enforcement departments across the country. All kinds of other local audits, statewide audits, reports from investigative reporters. So there's a variety of sources that we come to that number, but it is a moving target. It's always, ebbing and flowing as one state like Georgia eliminates their backlog. Another state, comes up like North Carolina last year with 15,000. So it's very difficult to get an accurate count. But I think I can just speak for us at Joyful Heart that we are hopeful. We're seeing states, come off of our map, having passed our 6 pillars of rape kit reform. We have 3 states at comprehensive reform right now. New York, thankfully, Texas, and Hawaii, and we're close in a couple other states. Kentucky, some Kentucky people are here, about to get to comprehensive reform, and Massachusetts and a few others. So as we see these states eliminating their backlog and passing comprehensive reform, we really are seeing the pace of reform is accelerating, and we do believe we will see an end to this problem. When that will be, we can't tell, but we are hopeful.
Thank you, Ilsa. I just want to say, Jennifer, I'm very hopeful. And the reason I'm hopeful is, number one, we're showing that testing all the kits is working. It's not the end, but it is working. You see it today at this conference. You'll see it as the Justice Department continues its work. And you'll see it as political pressure is brought to bear on legislators in the states that have not passed legislation requiring the testing of kits and other steps they should take. Because as survivors, heroes tell their stories about their cases being resolved, those stories don't just sit locally, they actually go nationally, especially through a medium like AP. And that puts pressure, appropriate pressure, on city government, on county government, on state government to pick up the mantle that's been started by our office in BJA and to end the rape kit backlog nationally. In the back.
Can you talk about what specifically is being done in New York to prevent the backlog?
Maggie? Just going to. This is Maggie Walk. The question was, what's being done now to end the backlog in New York? To prevent.
Somewhere I understand there is no backlog.
Yeah, there's no backlog. Oh.
Sure. I'll call on Ilsa to talk about the legislative reforms, but it's our understanding that upon a rape kit that is submitted to law enforcement, that kit is immediately tested by our local lab, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, and then profiles are there in turn uploaded into CODIS, and we have a statewide system for notifying jointly law enforcement and prosecutors and the lab when a hit occurs. So that is what generates the process for investigating and prosecuting the case.
That's Maggie Walk, who saved me on more than one occasion. But also, Ilsa, yeah.
So over the last couple of years, I mentioned that New York is at full reform, according to our 6 pillars of rape kit reform, which you can read about on our website, endthebacklog.org. New York has passed legislation to inventory on a regular basis the untested kits sitting in law enforcement custody, mandating the testing of all of those kits that are found to be untested. There are timelines in place now for submitting and testing newly collected kits. There's a tracking system being instituted across the state, and we last year just finalized legislation to ensure that survivors or have the right to know the status of their rape kit, and of course funding to do all of that. So in New York, we should see the end to the backlog, and through the mandated testing of newly collected kits, make sure that it never happens again.
Yes, sir. In the back.
Two questions. One, and forgive me for this. The money that was sent around the country, the way that solves the backlog is by paying overtime or by...
The money that was committed by the district attorney's office, the $38 million, paid for the process of identifying and testing the kits.
Right.
That's its specific goal. The BJA grants providing funding for a broader level of support, the investigation, for example, of the case after a hit was made. So they had a broader mandate. What we really wanted to do was do one thing superbly, and that was to do a nationwide RFP to invite jurisdictions that had backlogs to submit that information to us and for us to then work with them to eliminate that backlog.
And then my second question is, the one crime statistic that's been going up in New York City is rape. The
Right.
police department has said it's because of an increase in reporting. But how concerned are you that sort of the new backlog is a lack of resources in the Special Victims Unit, or perhaps not the same focus and dedication that there is for gun crimes, gangs, etc.?
I certainly think that the police department, as they have communicated in recent months, believes they are committing significant and the appropriate amount of resources to address the problem that's now confronting New York City with regard to sexual assault. So in the answer, I can speak for the police department, and I think I can speak for them to say they believe they are doing everything they can to make sure that they are investigating cases and resolving them. I don't think, for the reasons that Ilsa has said, legislative changes, that we are going to have a rape kit backlog going forward in New York. So even with the increased number of reports of rapes, I don't think that's going to translate into untested kits. So I think that should not be a problem legislatively. And with regard to the rise in reported rapes, I think indeed experts believe that as there is greater awareness about sexual assaults not being reported, and once they are reported, them being resolved, that I think it has led to an increase in reporting, both in sexual assault and in domestic violence.
Back here, behind the camera.
Yeah, hey, Dean.
Can you talk about here in New York or across the country? I know some of these cases are very old, but what was the issue? Lack of technology, lack of workers, lack of...
I'll ask Ilsa and John, but I'll just put it's a really it's the important question. I believe fundamentally there was a gender bias at issue, that a crime that was mostly a crime involving women was simply not viewed as important to solve or to be investigated as rigorously as crimes that were much easier for folks to identify with. For example, gun crimes. As I said, no gun ever goes untested. Drugs are tested, whether it's a small amount of cocaine or a ton. Law enforcement's priorities in those cases is clear. And Dean, I think that one can't look at these statistics about untested rape kits, one can't hear the stories that we've heard and not conclude that in jurisdictions there were serious crimes of sexual violence being occurred that were being ignored by the police. Now, why? I've given you one reason. I think there's a gender bias. Two, I think there was selective decision-making about what kinds of cases were worth testing kits on and what kinds weren't. We have a very active and very aggressive sex trafficking unit. And our sex crimes unit quite often ends up prosecuting individuals who rape and assault prostituted women. But it wasn't, I think, until relatively recently that law enforcement could understand that a prostituted woman could herself be raped, just like we didn't understand that in a domestic violence case that a husband would beat his wife. So I think these are the biases that have been affecting the results. Ilsa, John?
I'm not sure I could say it a lot better. I do think that gender bias factors into this heavily. Partly probably because sexual violence mostly affects women. Our society and frankly our criminal justice system has not prioritized sexual violence. So we don't put funding into our crime labs. We don't put appropriate funding into law enforcement, sex crimes units. We don't put appropriate funding and resources into training. And so one of the things we see when you go back and you look at these old cases and you open up the crime files and you read them is that there's a very, there's a lot of disbelief about survivors, whether or not they're telling the truth. There's a lot of bias and prejudice brought into these cases. And one of the things that we're seeing changing across the country, which is good, is more understanding about trauma and how trauma impacts survivors. So when somebody goes through trauma, their brain is not able to encode memories in a linear fashion. And so the story that a survivor tells law enforcement may come out in a way that sounds kind of jumbled. It sounds like, well, this detail doesn't match up with this other detail you told me. And to the untrained person, it can sound like lying. Or it can sound like, you know, the truth is being stretched. And so what we see in these files is, you know, she's not telling the truth. And what happens in that case gets shelved, the kit gets shelved, and it sits there for a very long time. So I think it really comes down to still victim blaming, and the disbelief of victims is still very prevalent in our society.
Just one comment on the process end of this. So, you know, I have an appeal to all the police chiefs across the country. See, one of the realities in having been a career law enforcement officer and still in that community, sometimes, as horrible as this whole topic is, the reality is that when an officer or detective is involved, they get the call in this case, the process that it involves taking custody, interviewing, as was already discussed, interviewing the victim, interviewing witnesses if there are witnesses, but the kit itself, they have to physically take custody of the kit and they have to transport the kit to the lab, which isn't always next door. And what happens when you have a detective who is overworked, their caseload is extremely high, and they have to travel a great distance with this kit to a lab and spend a day or more waiting for it to get processed. And I'm talking generally across the country. This is not a remark on the NYPD. Commissioner O'Neill and company do a great job. But the reality is this. We have to take a deeper look at the process. My personal view, you have your civilian workforce in the department, chain of custody. Have them take immediate custody and transport it. It does not weaken the case. It doesn't create a vulnerability. It's their one job. So your detective can now aggressively pursue the case and not have to spend critical time in transport and waiting at a lab, which could be hours away. And the point is, obviously it's worth it. It's not that the time isn't worth it. There's nothing more important than this. But the reality is the process can be done better. And we don't want any kits being put aside because of this sort of reality. We can correct it. We can improve upon the process and get these kits where they need to go timely so the detective can do detective work timely.
Thanks, John. Yes?
A prior question alluded to the fact that the connection between rape kits and justice and for survivors relies on survivors being willing to come forward and work with law enforcement. And as we know, there are a lot of communities in which sexual assault is prevalent, but there is some hesitation and some uneasiness around working with law enforcement. So I'm curious whether the funding that's being allocated, if there are any funds there plans to allocate funds for outreach or training that would make more survivors willing to come forward?
With regard to our dollars, the answer is no. Not that we don't believe what you said is absolutely true. I can say within the jurisdiction of Manhattan and within our office, and working with the police department, we are very much engaged in additional efforts to outreach and to being even more intelligent, more thoughtful when we're dealing with survivors of sexual assault in order to get at the facts in order to determine whether we have a case to bring. And Ilsa talked about training. It's called FEDI training, which is a training that police officers have undergone in New York, and now our entire office has undergone, on the issue of how to question survivors of sexual assault, recognizing, as Ilsa said, that the memory is not laid down in a linear way as a result of the trauma created. And Carol Mason, let's ask her up.
I hesitate to answer this, but I do know that when we designed the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, it was a combined effort to make sure that you brought together law enforcement, prosecutors, and the victims community to do exactly what we're talking to, bring a holistic approach to what happens when you have the information from the sexual assault kit testing, and to make sure that the victims community and the victims advocates were there to work with the victims who had been waiting, like these women, for years to hear what happened, and to work on that holistic approach to being proactive in addressing the results of the testing of the kits.
And we have representatives of many advocacy organizations in the audience today who are reaching out to us on a regular basis. And I know we're also working with the police department on the very issues that you're talking about. Can we have a last question if there is one? Yes.
186 arrests is a fairly small fraction of 55,000 total kits. Can you talk about sort of what's the story with the remainder of the kits that don't ultimately?
Well, ultimately, as I said, this is a work in process. Now all the kits have been, the results are in on 55,000 cases. Kits have been tested. I believe that we come together next year and we'll have a different number. But I think you also listen to the numbers that Scott had. You see that ultimately, I think, as these cases are investigated, the hit is just the beginning. That requires then an investigation further beyond just the fact that there's a DNA match. And this is going to take time. But I will say, looking at those numbers, if you're the survivor of one of those 186 cases, that's a pretty big deal. And as the women who spoke today, to have gone through the trial and had someone convicted is very powerful. Karen?
I just want to address the question about the statistics, because I think the statistics here are really powerful. So we tested about 55,000 kits, and roughly half of those resulted in a CODIS-eligible DNA profile. And roughly half of those hit to either another case or a known profile. So I can't imagine any other investment return that is 50% like that. And as the DA said, the hit is just the beginning, and now you have to investigate and prosecute the case. So those numbers are going to grow, and I think the numbers are staggering.
And Ilsa just indicated to me that the statistics Karen just indicated, 50% of the overall hit to an eligible DNA identified offender. That's the national average. So what's happened with our kits is pretty much the experience through Joyful Heart as well. All right, you've been very patient, but you've also been very generous with your time, and I can't say how much we appreciate all of you being here today to shine a light on this important subject. I want to say a special thanks to the survivors who came this morning, both who spoke and those who were in the audience. We so appreciate what you're doing.
I was going to have a little coughing.
Hi, everyone. A quick announcement about where to head next. If you're joining us for the best practices convening, please